Well, good morning, viewers. Today we have a 2004 Chevrolet Silverado 2500 HD. It's a extended cab long box with the 6.6 Duramax. It's here, was towed in for a crank no start condition. Apparently the story is the customer was using it, had it parked for a little while, had the block heater plugged in. Block heater apparently failed. I don't know where the cord is, but it seems to crank over fine, so we're going to have a look at some data parameters and take notice of some of the computer inputs. So let's get started by hooking up a scanner up to this thing. Well, the first thing I noticed before we even go to crank this thing is that this is not an OEM key. And I'm not sure if this has got security in this key. So that could be the cause of the problem. So I'm going to put the key in the ignition and take note of some lights on the dash before we go any further. One light we want to concentrate on is the check engine light and the security light beside it. Well, the security light went out and the check engine light is on. Sounds like it's got a heater issues with the mode orders or something. Okay, let's have a look at some data. Okay, so I haven't scanned this vehicle before. Let's see, this is an 04. It should, I may not auto ID because of the age of the vehicle. Well, we'll see. Oh yeah, it did. And it has 143,000 kilometers. That's not very many. 143, 346. Okay. Now, because of the age of the vehicle and this stupid snap-on scan tool, it doesn't allow a network scan. So I'm going to go into the engine and check for codes. Engine automatic, codes menu, display codes, all powertrain codes. I've got a booster battery hooked up to it. Well, it has a glow plug problem, but that shouldn't stop it from starting. One glow plug on number 8 cylinder. Let's look at some data. Engine data 1. I'm going to build a custom data list here. So here's the data parameters I think are important for a start. Engine speed, coolant temperature, air temperature, barometric pressure, fuel temperature, actual fuel rail pressure, and desired fuel rail pressure. Oh, by the way, is it out of fuel? No, it's got just under 3/4 of a tank. Ignition voltage, crank signal, cam signal, vehicle theft deterrent, fuel disable information, and we're going to graph. Let's see what we're at. Actual fuel rail pressure is in megapascals, is 1.4 megapascals. So we're going to watch this one here. And baro is at 28.9 inches of mercury, which sounds reasonable. Engine speed. And where's the cam signals? Right there. Okay, let's crank it and see what happens. We got an engine RPM, not very fast, but we got no fuel pressure. As you can see here, actual fuel rail pressure 1.4 megapascal. So I wonder if this thing has lost its prime. I'm going to try priming it. Okay, so the bleeder is here. I had to crack it loose with a 1/4 inch drive 13 mil. Loosen it a couple turns and then pump this plunger. Well, there's no fuel coming out, that's for sure. Now we have fuel. Let's go back and see if it'll start now. Sometimes the check valves in these fail and it causes it to lose prime. Also, we could have a leak on the suction side of the fuel lines, sometimes rusty fuel lines. So I'm not pulling up a custom data list, but now I see -40 for the fuel temp sensor, so that's not right, but that should not cause it to not start. Let's look at the fuel rail pressure. Where is it? Actual fuel rail pressure right there. Engine speed is just below it digitally. Could have a stuck open pressure regulator, I suppose. Not making any high pressure fuel pressure at all. Desired. Why is that 0? That's odd. It wasn't 0 before. We've got some odd data parameters here now. Coolant temperature is -40. Intake air temperature is -40. Let's watch engine RPM while it's cranking. That's not right. Let's cycle this key off and on again and see what happens. I don't know if the scan tool is screwing up or the ECM screwing up. There's engine RPM again. Now we got RPM. That's weird. Let's look at desired actual fuel rail pressure. I gotta get a battery charger on this thing. And desired fuel rail pressure. There's no smoke out the tailpipe. Well, for whatever reason, we're not getting fuel pressure. Let's try bleeding it again. Well, I strongly believe it's a fuel problem because I've bled this thing like 3 times now, and every time I open this bleeder, as you can see, there's more air. I introduced some propane from a propane torch, a little propane bottle over there, right into the air cleaner, and it fired and ran for a few seconds, but it didn't make any fuel pressure. So I'm going to take this fuel line off here. This is the inlet line, and this is the outlet line, I believe. I'm going to see if I can get this fuel line off and put it into a clean container of diesel fuel. So I decided rather than taking the fuel line off at the inlet of the filter, I would take it off over here at the quick couplers. I've taken both the fuel supply and return and connected them into a 2-gallon can of diesel fuel. I realized that I'm not sure what the return flow rate is like, but if I only supplied it into the inlet line, then most of the fuel would return back to the tank before I get it in the shop. I'm not sure, but I primed it now. We're going to see if it'll start. It's not making any fuel pressure at all. Now it's coming up. There we go. So that confirms it. We've got a suction leak into the fuel system, so I'm going to gingerly drive this in the shop now where I can work on it more conveniently. The suction line is 1/2 inch, the return line is 3/8. All I did was push them on. We'll get it set up on the hoist and we'll see if we can see any compromised fuel lines underneath. So we got this truck up on the hoist. The lower line here is the suction line. It doesn't look bad. No obviously rusted spots. It's coated with oily residue. Now I see somebody's changed all the brake lines, and I would hope that wasn't a professional job done by a shop, because They're just routed like this. They're just rubbing on the floor, not secure. I mean, why wouldn't you just buy the kit and put all the stainless steel lines in and be done with it? I've done dozens of them. They're not that bad, but nevertheless, that's secondary. The lines don't look too bad unless it's compromised above the tank. And I lent my borescope to somebody, so I can't look up there. Now, that coupler up there that you see right there, if I could disconnect that and put a piece of clear hose in between and reconnect the lines up top and start it up and watch for bubbles, I would expect that once it's running, it would stay running. Unless there's no fuel in the tank. Now, I did ask him if he had a problem with the fuel gauge, and he said no. It doesn't feel empty. I wonder if I shoot that with a thermal camera, if I can see the fuel level in the tank now that it's warming up in the shop. I'm going to try that. So looking at the back of the tank, you can see this is a huge tank, and I got the thermal camera here. You can see the line. According to the gauge, it was just under 3/4 of a tank. So you can see the black line there indicating the fuel level. The plastic is warming up and the fuel is keeping it cold there. I think that's over half a tank anyways. So I think there's fuel in the tank. So I'm wondering if the inlet or the outlet at the fuel pump, or there's no fuel pump, at the sender is rusted out and compromised. Considering the age of the truck, that's very likely. So I did a visual inspection as best I could from underneath with my old borescope, and I can't see anything really bad with the top of the fuel pump, or fuel sender I should say. So I've blown fuel out of the line back to the tank with compressed air gently, so that line should now be empty, and I'm putting smoke into that line with my Motivac smoke machine, and we're going to raise it up now and see if we can see any smoke coming out anywhere. So the line is holding roughly 12 inches of water, which is about a half a psi, and there's no obvious leaks anywhere that I can see. Now, unfortunately, this is a positive pressure on the line, and it could have a leak even at that seal there on that connection right there, and it leaks under a vacuum. So nothing obvious, that's for sure. And no signs of fuel. When I blew the fuel back, there's no signs of fuel. Looking up in here, oh boy. I'm going to try and disconnect this line here and see if I can put a piece of hose in between there, clear hose, and watch for bubbles, but that's not easy. And this fuel, well, I'm going to try and disconnect that line. So I dropped the cooler off the frame, and I wondered why that line was relatively clean looking. So it's been repaired. You can see there's a section alignment put in with a brass union. I've got smoke under pressure on it right now, and I'm trying to release this fitting here, and it won't release. Anyways, I'm going to try and get that off and put a piece of clear hose in there and start it up to see if I got bubbles coming from the tank. So I did get that line off, and it was it must have been a repair fitting or something that somebody put on there. And if I put smoke pressure in the system now, you can hear the fuel bubbling inside the tank. But there's no leak here that I can see. I just pushed the line on partially. So I'm going to go to the hardware store and get some clear line and some 1/2-inch copper tubing so that I can make or reproduce this connection. So there's a piece of 1/2-inch clear tubing in the suction line at that fitting. I used a piece of 1/2-inch aluminum tubing from an AC pipe that was scrap. It's the right dimension on the outside. It doesn't have to be clipped in. There's no pressure on it. There's actually suction on it. So we're going to do the same thing up at the top on the two lines at the engine. Well, I have bled this thing like 4 or 5 times now, and it keeps running out of fuel. Even when I'm trying to bleed it, it just ran out of fuel again. There's the line over there. You can see there's no fuel coming out of the filter housing. It's just nothing but air bubbles coming from the tank. Trouble is, I don't have a helper here to start this vehicle and watch for air bubbles underneath. But I'm sure it's not leaking anywhere along the line. It's got to be leaking in the pickup or at the pickup in the tank. I hate like hell to drop that fuel tank because it's 3/4 full. Oh well, I'm going to get a helper. So I've tried bleeding this thing 6 times. I get fuel, but it's not consistent. I took the fuel tank out of the equation now, and I connected the fuel tank or the gas can here, and I still can't get it to bleed. So I'm starting to believe that there's a suction leak in that line. I wonder if it's leaking where that union was put in aftermarket. I'm thinking about just running a new line. Of course, smoke testing the line is not conclusive because it's very, very low pressure, and this line is actually under a vacuum. So I'm thinking of running a new line or capping the line at one end and pressure testing it, see if I can see a specific leak now that there's fuel in the line. So I capped the line at the tank, or at the connection going to the short pipe at the tank. So it should be blocked off, it should be sealed, and if I put a vacuum pump on the line, as you can see, it doesn't hold vacuum. Yet I can't see a leak anywhere. I don't think it's these O-rings. I took that coupler off from down below and I checked it there. I cut the pipe about 1 foot away where it was nice and clean. So somewhere between here and the cooler down there, there's a pinhole in the line, and yet it doesn't seem to leak. You would think if I put pressure on it, it would leak fuel out of it now because there is fuel in the line. So I'm going to run a new line right from here to the tank connector and then see if we can prime it. So there it is, back together and running again. We're still bleeding air out of the system. This is the return line. I left it in to see how many air bubbles are coming out of it. Clearing up pretty good now. I've been running for about 3 minutes. I have no problem priming it now with that piece of hose in there. You can see a new hose. I routed it. I'm going to tie it up here. Tied it along the frame. Connected it to the elbow coming out of the tank. So after about 15 minutes of running, you can see there's no air bubbles in the return line. So I'm going to connect the return line up as it was before. And we'll take a full road test. It does need number 8 glow plug replaced, so we'll do that at a later time. So we just got back from about a 15-kilometer road test. The truck runs awesome. No misfires, no stumbles. This has low mileage considering the age of the vehicle, if that odometer is correct. And other than the glow plug, which I've ordered, I think I'm going to see how it starts tomorrow morning before I give it back to the customer. But I think this thing is resolved. So thanks for watching.